The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the usual mix of clicking, chirping, and harmonious tones that represented the dozen species gathered for their monthly session. Ambassador Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted his crystalline breathing apparatus as he reviewed the agenda displayed on his neural interface. Today's topics included trade route adjustments, mining rights disputes, and the usual complaints about the younger species causing trouble in neutral space. What wasn't on the agenda was the strange report sitting in his private files, something his intelligence network had flagged as curious but inconsequential. Human ships had been quietly departing from every major spaceport, research station, and colony world over the past 3 months. Not fleeing, not evacuating, just leaving. Methodically, systematically, without fanfare or explanation. The Terran delegation requests recognition, announced Counselor THYSS, her serpentine form coiled elegantly around her speaking podium. The chamber's translation matrix hummed to life, converting her sibilant whispers into the common tone. Ambassador Chun Wei stepped forward from the human delegation area, his modest gray suit stark against the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by the other representatives. Humans always dressed plainly for council sessions, another sign of their peculiar modesty, or perhaps their lack of proper civilization, depending on who you asked. Honored counselors, Chun began, his voice steady and unremarkable. The United Terran government formally announces our withdrawal from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We thank you for the opportunities for cooperation and wish all member species prosperity in your future endeavors. The chamber fell silent. Even Amala's collective's constant background humming ceased. Vextar felt his breathing filters clog as he processed what he'd just heard. Withdrawal? Humans were leaving the council entirely? High Counselor Zephyran, eldest of the ethereal caste, floated down from his elevated position. His translucent form shimmered with confusion patterns. Ambassador Chun, this is highly irregular. You cannot simply announce withdrawal without proper procedure. There must be a formal review process, impact assessments, gradual transition protocols. We've already begun the transition, Chun replied calmly. All human personnel have been recalled from joint ventures. Our research facilities are being transferred to local authorities or shut down as appropriate. Trade agreements will be honored through their completion dates, but no new contracts will be initiated. You can't be serious, scoffed Ambassador Crothall, his 4 mandibles clicking in agitation. Humans need the council more than we need humans. Your technology is primitive. Your lifespans are laughably short. Your expansion rate is reckless and unstable. Where will you go? What will you do? Chin's expression didn't change, but Vextar caught something in the human's eyes, a flicker of something that might have been amusement. We'll manage, Ambassador Crothall. Thank you for your concern. The questions came rapidly after that, a barrage of demands for explanation that Chun deflected with polite but increasingly brief responses. No, there had been no triggering incident. No, they weren't upset about the mining rights decision 6 months ago. No, they weren't joining a rival alliance. No, they wouldn't reconsider if offered better terms. But why? The question came from Counselor Ythera of the Hive Clusters, her compound eyes reflecting genuine bewilderment. Your species has benefited greatly from council membership. Access to our trade networks, our technology exchanges, our protection agreements. Why abandon all of this? For the first time, Chun hesitated. His gaze swept the chamber, taking in each delegation in turn. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Because sometimes, honored counselors, you discover that you've outgrown your childhood home. With that, the human delegation filed out of the chamber in perfect silence. No dramatic speeches, no slammed doors, no threats or ultimatums. They simply left, leaving behind only the faint scent of the strange coffee beverage they were always drinking and a chamber full of confused alien diplomats. Vextar watched them go, his analytical mind already racing through implications. Humans controlled 17 worlds now, including some of the richest mining operations in the Outer Rim. Their fleet was small, but had proven surprisingly effective in the few conflicts they'd been involved in. Their research, while primitive by galactic standards, had produced some interesting innovations in energy efficiency and structural engineering. But, most importantly, they'd just done something no species had ever done before. They'd left the Galactic Council voluntarily, without warning, and without apparent fear of the consequences. As the chamber erupted into nervous discussions about trade implications and security concerns, one thought kept echoing in Vextar's mind. What did the humans know that they didn't 3 months after the humans' departure? The first cracks began to show. Admiral Vorthe K. of the Draconian Maritime Forces stood before the tactical display in his flagship's command center, watching red warning indicators spread across the stellar map like a plague. 17 different star systems were reporting the same phenomenon. Massive energy signatures appearing at the edge of sensor range, followed by complete communication blackout. "Sir," his communications officer reported, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We've lost contact with Outpost Vanguard." Last transmission was them screaming about something massive coming through jump space. Vortake scaled feast Tslenchet. Outpost Vanguard was supposed to be impregnable, a joint council defense station with shields that could withstand a supernova and weapons that could crack planets. If something had taken it out, the implications were terrifying. "Any word from the expeditionary fleet we sent to investigate the Kepler anomaly?" "Nothing, sir." They reached the coordinates where the energy signature was detected, and then silence. That was 6 days ago. On the other side of the galaxy, similar scenes played out across a dozen different command centers. The ethereal High Command watched their deep space monitoring stations vanish one by one. The Zephyrian Empire's finest scientists worked frantically to understand sensor readings that defied all known physics. The Mollusk Collective's hive minds buzzed with increasing distress as their bioships reported encounters with something their racial memory insisted shouldn't exist. Back on the Council homeworld of Nexus Prime, an emergency session had been called. The Great Chamber buzzed with panic and confusion as representatives demanded answers that no one could provide. "The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases," reported Chief Science Advisor Meltharis, his tentacles writhing in agitation. "The readings suggest technology that operates on principles we don't understand. Whatever's out there, it's not using conventional fusion, antimatter, or even zero-point energy systems." "Could it be the Devourers?" whispered Counselor Ythera, her compound eyes dim with ancient fear. "The old enemy from beyond the galactic rim?" A shudder ran through the assembled delegates. The Devourers were legend, mythical entities that supposedly consumed entire star systems in the early days of galactic civilization. Most scholars believe them to be ancient propaganda, cautionary tales told to keep primitive species from venturing too far into deep space. "Impossible," scoffed Ambassador Crothall, though his mandibles clicked nervously. "The Devourers are fairy tales, ancient superstition. Whatever this is, it's a natural phenomenon or perhaps some unknown species with advanced technology." "Then why," interrupted Ambassador Vextar, rising slowly from his seat, "did the humans leave?" The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to the Zephyrian diplomat, whose usually calm demeanor had taken on an edge of barely controlled fear. "Think about it," Vextar continued, his voice echoing in the vast space. "For 2 centuries, humans have been model citizens of the Council. Cooperative, peaceful, eager to learn. They contributed to our joint research projects, participated in our trade networks, supported our decisions even when those decisions didn't favor their interests. And then, suddenly, without warning or explanation, they pack up and leave. All of them. Completely. Just as these energy signatures begin appearing. You're suggesting they knew?" High Counselor Zephyran's ethereal form flickered with disbelief. "How could they possibly know about a threat that our most advanced sensors can barely detect?" "I'm suggesting that maybe we never understood humans as well as we thought we did." The uncomfortable truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. For all their cooperation and seemingly primitive technology, humans had always been enigmatic. Their ships used unusual design principles. Their weapons were crude, but surprisingly effective. Their soldiers showed a disturbing tendency to survive situations that should have killed them multiple times over. And their scientists, despite lacking access to many advanced theoretical frameworks, kept producing innovations that their more sophisticated colleagues found difficult to explain. "Sir!" The shout came from a junior aide who had burst into the chamber without ceremony. "Priority alert from the Deep Space Monitoring Array. We're detecting multiple massive signatures at the galactic rim. They're moving this way. Fast!" The aide's hand shook as he activated the chamber's main display. The stellar map that materialized above their heads showed the familiar spiral of their galaxy, but now dotted with dozens of ominous red marks moving steadily inward from the dark spaces between the spiral arms. "How fast?" whispered someone. "At current rate of approach, they'll reach the first inhabited systems in 3 months." In the stunned silence that followed, Vextar's mind raced back to the human ambassador's final words. "Sometimes you discover that you've outgrown your childhood home." At the time, it had seemed like philosophical nonsense. Now, with unknown threats bearing down on them from a void, it sounded less like philosophy and more like a warning. "We need to contact the humans," he said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "Whatever's coming, they knew about it. They prepared for it. We need to know what they know. And if they refuse to help us?" asked Counselor THYSS. Vextar looked at the approaching red dots on the display, then at the faces of his colleagues, representatives of species that had dominated the galaxy for millennia, now faced with the terrifying possibility that they might not be the apex of galactic civilization after all. "Then, we hope that whatever's coming is more merciful than we were." The diplomatic ship Reconciliation dropped out of jump space at the edge of the Terran home system, its hull scarred from the desperate journey through increasingly dangerous space. Ambassador Vextar stood on the bridge, watching Earth grow larger on the view screen, a blue-green marble that looked deceptively peaceful against the star-filled void. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're being scanned. The intensity is unusual. Whatever they're using, it's far more sophisticated than the technology they had when they were council members. Hail them. Request permission to approach Earth for emergency diplomatic talks." The response came faster than expected, and the voice that answered was crisp, professional, and utterly unsurprised. "Zephyrian Vessel Reconciliation, this is Sol Defense Command. Ambassador Vextar, you are cleared for approach to Luna Station. Follow the designated approach vector precisely. Any deviation will result in immediate defensive action." Vextar felt his breathing filters constrict. How had they known who he was before he'd even identified himself? And Luna Station, humans had never mentioned having a facility there during their council membership. As the reconciliation followed the assigned course, Vextar began to understand why. Luna Station wasn't just a facility, it was a fortress. Weapon platforms that dwarfed anything in the council fleet dotted the moon's surface. Ships moved in formations around the station, their designs unlike anything in his databases. But most unsettling of all was what he couldn't see. The empty spaces where his sensors suggested something massive was stationed, cloaked beyond his equipment's ability to detect. "By the void," whispered his tactical officer. "Sir, I'm reading energy signatures that shouldn't be possible. Those weapon platforms are outputting more power than our entire task force." The docking bay that received them was immaculate, sterile, and clearly designed to handle ships much larger than his modest diplomatic vessel. As Vextar disembarked with his small retinue, he noticed human personnel moving with a precision and confidence that hadn't been evident during their council days. These weren't the eager-to-please diplomats he remembered. These were soldiers who knew exactly what they were doing. "Ambassador Vextar," a familiar voice called out. Chunwei approached, but the modest diplomat had been replaced by someone wearing what was clearly military dress uniform, complete with decorations and insignia that Vextar didn't recognize. "Welcome to Luna Station. I trust your journey wasn't too difficult?" "Difficult enough," Vextar replied carefully. 17 systems have gone dark. Our fleets are being picked off one by something we can't understand. We need help, Chun. We need to know what you know. Chin's expression remained neutral. Follow me. The Admiral is waiting. They walked through corridors that hummed with barely contained energy, past soldiers whose equipment looked decades ahead of anything Vextar had seen during humanity's council membership. The walls displayed star charts showing not just the local galaxy, but neighboring galaxies as well, marked with symbols and notations that suggested a level of exploration and knowledge that should have taken millennia to acquire. The conference room they entered was dominated by a massive holographic display showing the current galactic situation. Red markers indicated systems that had gone dark, while golden markers showed the advancing entities from the galactic rim. But what caught Vextar's attention were the blue markers scattered throughout space. Human positions that hadn't existed 6 months ago. Admiral Morrison, Chun announced, Ambassador Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire. The woman who turned to greet them was tall, silver-haired, and carried herself with an authority that made Vextar's diplomatic instincts scream warnings. This wasn't someone who had risen through the ranks of the modest fleet, he remembered. This was someone who commanded something much larger. Ambassador, she said, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. I assume you're here about the harvesters. The what? The entities currently dismantling your civilization, Morrison said matter-of-factly. We call them harvesters because that's essentially what they do. They arrive in a star system, consume all available matter and energy, then move on to the next system. Think of them as a galactic cleaning service, except they don't discriminate between inhabited and uninhabited worlds. Vextar felt his breathing apparatus struggle to keep up with his racing heartbeat. You knew about this? You knew they were coming, and you said nothing? We tried, Chen interjected quietly. 3 years ago, Ambassador, when our deep space monitoring stations detected the first signs of their approach. We brought our findings to the Council Science Committee. Do you remember the response? The memory hit Vextar like a physical blow. A human delegation requesting emergency session time to present alarming discoveries about entities beyond the galactic rim. The committee had dismissed it as primitive fear-mongering, the kind of superstitious panic expected from a young species that didn't understand the sophisticated realities of galactic politics. You were laughed out of the chamber, he whispered. Not laughed, Morrison corrected. Condescended too. Patted on the head like children who'd had a nightmare. Ambassador Crothall was particularly eloquent about how primitive human paranoia was wasting the Council's valuable time. So you left. So we prepared, Morrison said, gesturing to the holographic display. 3 years, Ambassador. 3 years to build what we needed, to move our people to defensible positions, to develop the technologies and strategies necessary to fight something that treats matter and energy as raw materials. Vextar stared at the display, beginning to understand the scope of what he was seeing. How many ships do you have? Enough, Morrison replied. The question is whether you're ready to hear what it's going to cost to save what's left of your civilization. The golden markers on the display continued their inexorable advance toward the galaxy's heart, while the blue markers of humanity's hidden fleet moved to intercept positions. Vextar realized with growing dread that the modest, cooperative humans the Council had known were gone, replaced by something that had spent 3 years preparing for a war the rest of the galaxy didn't even know was coming. What do you want? He asked. Morrison's smile was cold as space itself. Everything the emergency council session convened in a bunker 3 kilometers beneath Nexus Prime surface. Of the original 12-member species, only 8 remained in contact. The others had either gone silent as the Harvester advance consumed their territories, or had withdrawn their representatives to defend their home worlds in whatever way they could manage. Vextar stood before the assembled delegates, still processing everything he had witnessed at Luna Station. The terms Admiral Morrison had presented weren't just demanding, they were revolutionary. Complete military command authority, unrestricted access to all technological databases, The right to conscript populations and resources is needed. And, most controversial of all, the dissolution of the Galactic Council's governmental structure in favor of a unified command hierarchy with humans at the top. This is preposterous. Ambassador Crothal's mandibles clicked furiously as he paced around his delegation area. They want us to surrender our sovereignty to a species that was barely above stone tools when the Council was founded. Humans have been part of galactic civilization for exactly 2 centuries. We've maintained order for 50,000 years. And in those 50,000 years, Vextar replied quietly, how many existential threats to the galaxy have we faced? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. The voice belonged to Counselor Ythera, whose compound eyes were dim with exhaustion. My homeworld is gone, Crothall. Completely. Not destroyed, consumed. There's nothing left where Hive Prime used to be except empty space. Not even debris. Whatever the harvesters are, they don't just kill civilizations. They erase them. The chamber fell silent. Hive Prime had been one of the most heavily fortified worlds in the galaxy, home to over 40 billion inhabitants, and protected by orbital defense platforms that could have held off the entire Council fleet. If it was simply gone, the humans knew. High Counselor Zephran's ethereal form flickered with patterns of deep distress. 3 years they tried to warn us, and we dismissed them. Now, they're the only ones prepared for what's coming. Because they planned this. Crothal's accusation hung in the air like poison. Think about it. They leave the Council just as these entities arrive. They have technology they never revealed during their membership. Ships and weapons that dwarf our finest achievements. This isn't coincidence. It's conspiracy. You're suggesting humans somehow summon beings from beyond the galactic rim to conquer the galaxy? Vextar's voice carried disbelief. To what end? They already had everything they wanted through peaceful cooperation. Did they? The question came from Science Advisor Meltharis, whose tentacles writhed with agitation. Look at how he treated them. How we all treated them. Primitive. Young. Inexperienced. We gave them scraps from our table and expected them to be grateful. What if they were never as primitive as we assume? The uncomfortable truth settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. In 2 centuries of Council membership, humans had never demanded better terms, never pushed for greater representation, never complained about being assigned the least desirable territories and most dangerous missions. They had accepted every slight, every condescending comment, every dismissive gesture with remarkable grace. They were studying us, Counselor THYSS whispered, her serpentine form coiled tight with realization. All this time, they were learning how we think, how we fight, how we organize our societies. We thought we were the teachers, but we were the subjects. Sir, the interruption came from a communications technician who had burst into the chamber. Priority alert from the Outer Rim Defense Network. The harvesters have reached the Corral system. Admiral Vorthe K is reporting contact with the enemy. The chamber's main display activated, showing a tactical view of the Corral system transmitted from Admiral Vorthe K's flagship. What they saw defied comprehension. The entities approaching weren't ships in any recognizable sense. They were geometric impossibilities, structures that seemed to fold space around themselves as they moved. Worse, they were vast beyond measure, each one large enough to dwarf a moon. Fleet elements engaging, came Vorthe K's voice through the static-filled communication link. Weapons have effect, but by the void they're adapting. They're learning our attack patterns in real time. The display showed the Council's finest warships unleashing everything they had. Fusion lances, quantum torpedoes, gravity wells, reality shapers, the accumulated military might of a dozen advanced civilizations. For a moment, it seemed to work. The lead harvester showed damage, its impossible geometry flickering. Then it struck back. The counterattack wasn't a weapon in any sense they understood. Reality simply changed around the Council fleet. Ships that had been there one moment were gone the next, their atoms scattered across space. Others found their hulls aging centuries in seconds, turning to dust and drift. Still others simply vanished, folded into spaces that couldn't exist. All ships retreat. Retreat. Vorthake's voice cracked with panic. They're not weapons. They're forces of nature. We can't fight. The transmission cut to static. In the horrified silence that followed, Vextar found his voice. How long until they reach the core worlds? At their current rate of advance, 8 weeks, the technician whispered. 8 weeks until the heart of galactic civilization faced entities that could rewrite reality itself. 8 weeks to decide whether pride was worth more than survival. We need to send word to Admiral Morrison, Vextar said finally. Unconditional acceptance of terms. No, Crothall snarled. I won't surrender my species to human arrogance. We'll find another way. We always have. What other way? Ythera demanded. My entire species is extinct except for the colonies that were evacuated to human space. The Draconians just lost their finest admiral and most powerful fleet. The Harvesters are literally eating our galaxy, and the only species that saw it coming is offering to help. What exactly is your alternative? Crothall's mandibles clicked in frustrated silence. The vote, High Counselor Zephyran announced, his form flickering with resignation. All in favor of accepting human terms for joint defense. 6 lights appeared on the voting display. Only Crothall and the Draconian delegation remained dark. It's decided then, Zephyran said. May the cosmos forgive us for the choice we had to make. As the delegates began to file out, preparing messages that would forever change the balance of galactic power, Vextar remained behind, staring at the tactical display where Coral's system used to be. Empty space stared back at him, and in that emptiness, he began to understand what Admiral Morrison had meant when she said the price would be everything. The humans weren't just offering to fight the Harvesters. They were offering to save a civilization that had never truly valued them. And the cost wasn't just political surrender. It was the humbling realization that the galaxy's youngest species had always been its wisest 6 months later. Vextar stood on the observation deck of the human flagship Unconquerable, watching the most impossible sight in galactic history unfold before him. The combined fleets of humanity and what remained of the Council species moved in perfect coordination through space, but it was nothing like the chaotic, proud displays of power he remembered from the old days. This was precision. This was art. Human vessels moved like dancers through formations of alien ships that had been retrofitted with technology Vextar was only beginning to understand. Crystalline Zephyrian cruisers now bristled with weapons that seemed to bend reality around their targets. Draconian dreadnoughts had been equipped with engines that could fold space-time itself. Even the few surviving Hive Cluster bioships pulsed with hybrid technology that merged organic and mechanical in ways that should have been impossible. Impressive, isn't it? Admiral Morrison appeared beside him. Her attention focused on the tactical displays rather than the philosophical implications of what they were witnessing. How? Vextar asked. 6 months ago, you claimed to have crude technology. Your ships were smaller than ours, your weapons less sophisticated. Now you're retrofitting our fleets with devices that operate on principles our best scientists don't understand. How is any of this possible? Morrison smiled, and for the first time since their reunion, it seemed genuine rather than diplomatic. Because we've had longer to prepare than you think. Ambassador, how old do you believe human civilization is? Your records indicate approximately 12,000 years of recorded history before achieving spaceflight. Our public records, Morrison corrected. Tell me, in all the time humans were members of the Council, did any of your species ever visit Earth? Actually visit, not just orbital scans. Vextar thought back. I know. Humans always met us at neutral stations or came to Council worlds. Earth was considered a primitive world under development protocols. Very convenient for us, Morrison said quietly. What if I told you that when your scouts first detected human radio transmissions 2 centuries ago, they weren't observing a primitive species taking its first steps into the cosmos? What if they were observing the carefully constructed facade of a civilization that had already spread across a dozen galaxies? The words hit Vextar like a physical blow. That's impossible. We would have detected, would you? Your sensors are designed to detect the kind of technology you understand. Fusion drives, antimatter reactions, zero-point energy manipulation. But what if someone deliberately designed their technology to be invisible to exactly those scanning methods? What if everything you observed was meant to be observed? On the tactical display, the human ships were moving into attack formation. Ahead of them, space itself seemed wrong, twisted into geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The harvesters had arrived at the Sigma Draconis system, where humanity had chosen to make their stand. Why? Vextar vis spirit. Why the deception? Why pretend to be primitive? Because the galaxy wasn't ready for us, Morrison replied. Because every time a truly advanced civilization appears, it either dominates or destroys everything around it. We didn't want to be conquerors. We wanted to learn, to understand, to find our place in the galactic community without disrupting the peace you'd all worked so hard to build. But you knew about the harvesters. We fought them before. In the Andromeda Spiral, 300 years ago. In the Magellanic clusters before that. They appear every few millennia, consume whatever civilization they find, then retreat to the dark spaces between galaxies to hibernate. We thought we destroyed them completely, but apparently some survived. The first wave of harvesters entered weapons range, and space erupted in light. But this wasn't the desperate, ineffective bombardment that had failed at Corral system. This was surgical, precise, and absolutely devastating. Human weapons struck the geometric entities with energies that caused them to unravel rather than simply explode. Reality warping fields collapsed. Space-time distortions normalized. One by one, the impossible structures that had devoured entire star systems were reduced to ordinary matter and scattered to the cosmic winds. Ow! Vextar breathed, watching entities that had seemed unstoppable dissolve under human fire. Pattern recognition, Morrison explained. The harvesters aren't magical. Their technology, incredibly advanced technology that manipulates fundamental forces we've only recently learned to understand. But technology can be analyzed, countered, defeated. It just takes time, patience, and the willingness to think differently about the nature of reality itself. The battle was over in less than an hour. Where the Harvester Vanguard had been, only empty space remained. But on the long-range sensors, more formations were approaching, hundreds of them, thousands. This was just the scout force, Morrison said, anticipating his question. The real fleet is still 3 days out. But now we know our weapons work, our tactics are sound, and our alliance holds together under fire. When they arrive, we'll be ready. Vextar turned to face the human admiral, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the modest diplomat who had sat quietly in council sessions, not the mysterious military commander who had demanded their surrender, but something else entirely. Something ancient and patient and utterly dedicated to the preservation of life in all its forms. What happens after, he asked, when the harvesters are defeated? Do you still intend to dissolve the council? To remake galactic civilization according to human design? Morrison's expression grew thoughtful. That depends on you, doesn't it? On all of you. We never wanted to rule the galaxy, Ambassador. We wanted to save it. But we learned long ago that sometimes, in order to save something, you have to be willing to change it completely. Around them, the combined fleet was already moving to the next engagement zone, following tactical plans that had been centuries in the making. Ships that had once competed for resources and prestige now worked together with mechanical precision, their crews united by the simple understanding that survival trumped pride. The council as it was is dead, Vextar said quietly. We all know that. The question is what replaces it. Something better, Morrison replied. Something that remembers this moment, when the galaxy's eldest species trusted its youngest with everything they had left to lose. Something that remembers what cooperation can accomplish when pride and prejudice are set aside. In the distance, space twisted as the main harvester fleet began to emerge from the dark spaces between stars. But, for the first time since the crisis began, Vextar felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Humanity had spent 2 centuries learning everything the galaxy had to teach them. Now it was time for the galaxy to learn what humanity had to offer in return. And perhaps, when it was over, both would be stronger for the exchange. The real war was about to begin, but they would face it together, not as conquerors and conquered, but as allies who had found each other in the galaxy's darkest hour and chosen to fight for something greater than their individual survival. They had chosen to fight for each other. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the usual mix of clicking, chirping, and harmonious tones that represented the dozen species gathered for their monthly session. Ambassador Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted his crystalline breathing apparatus as he reviewed the agenda displayed on his neural interface. Today's topics included trade route adjustments, mining rights disputes, and the usual complaints about the younger species causing trouble in neutral space. What wasn't on the agenda was the strange report sitting in his private files, something his intelligence network had flagged as curious but inconsequential. Human ships had been quietly departing from every major spaceport, research station, and colony world over the past 3 months. Not fleeing, not evacuating, just leaving, methodically, systematically, without fanfare or explanation. The Terran delegation requests recognition, announced Counselor Tichwesis, her serpentine form coiled elegantly around her speaking podium. The chamber's translation matrix hummed to life, converting her sibilant whispers into the common tongue. Ambassador Chun Wei stepped forward from a human delegation area, his modest gray suit stark against the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by the other representatives. Humans always dressed plainly for council sessions, another sign of their peculiar modesty, or perhaps their lack of proper civilization, depending on who you asked. Honored counselors, Chun began, his voice steady and unremarkable. The United Terran government formally announces our withdrawal from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We thank you for the opportunities for cooperation and wish all member species prosperity in your future endeavors. The chamber fell silent. Even the Mollusk Collective's constant background humming ceased. Vextar felt his breathing filters clog as he processed what he'd just heard. Withdrawal? Humans were leaving the council entirely? High Counselor Zeph Ran, eldest of the ethereal caste, floated down from his elevated position. His translucent form shimmered with confusion patterns. Ambassador Chun, this is highly irregular. You cannot simply announce withdrawal without proper procedure. There must be a formal review process, impact assessments, gradual transition protocols. We've already begun the transition, Chun replied calmly. All human personnel have been recalled from joint ventures. Our research facilities are being transferred to local authorities or shut down as appropriate. Trade agreements will be honored through their completion dates, but no new contracts will be initiated. You can't be serious, scoffed Ambassador Crothall, his 4 mandibles clicking in agitation. Humans need the Council more than we need humans. Your technology is primitive. Your lifespans are laughably short. Your expansion rate is reckless and unstable. Where will you go? What will you do? Chin's expression didn't change, but Vextar caught something in the human's eyes, a flicker of something that might have been amusement. We'll manage, Ambassador Crothall. Thank you for your concern. The questions came rapidly after that, a barrage of demands for explanation that Chun deflected with polite but increasingly brief responses. No, there had been no triggering incident. No, they weren't upset about the mining rights decision 6 months ago. No, they weren't joining a rival alliance. No, they wouldn't reconsider if offered better terms. But why? The question came from Counselor Ythera of the Hive Clusters, her compound eyes reflecting genuine bewilderment. Your species has benefited greatly from Council membership. Access to our trade networks, our technology exchanges, our protection agreements. Why abandon all of this? For the first time, Chun hesitated. His gaze swept the chamber, taking in each delegation in turn. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Because sometimes, honored counselors, you discover that you've outgrown your childhood home. With that, the human delegation filed out of the chamber in perfect silence. No dramatic speeches, no slammed doors, no threats or ultimatums. They simply left, leaving behind only the faint scent of the strange coffee beverage they were always drinking and a chamber full of confused alien diplomats. Vextar watched them go, his analytical mind already racing through implications. Humans controlled 17 worlds now, including some of the richest mining operations in the Outer Rim. Their fleet was small, but had proven surprisingly effective in the few conflicts they'd been involved in. Their research, while primitive by galactic standards, had produced some interesting innovations in energy efficiency and structural engineering. But most importantly, they'd just done something no species had ever done before. They'd left the Galactic Council voluntarily, without warning, and without apparent fear of the consequences. As the chamber erupted into nervous discussions about trade implications and security concerns, one thought kept echoing in Vextar's mind. What did the humans know that they didn't?